Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pets Ask Me Anything session. My name is Micah Schur. I'm co-chairing Pets this year, and I'm joined by, I don't know if they're considered panelists or,
combatants.
Thank you, combatants. Three incredible combatants today: Susan Landau, Serge Egelman, and Carmela Troncoso. Troncoso. I'm fighting jet lag. And the way that we're going to do this today is I'm going to introduce our three question receivers. And in the meantime, if you could use Zulip to pose questions, we're going to exclusively use Zulip for our questions today. That would be awesome, because in my experience, an Ask Me Anything session with no questions is an extremely awkward thing. So please take the time now as I'm introducing our three fellows today to start posing questions. Okay. Starting from stage right, Susan Landau is the Brid Professor of Computer Security and Policy at the Fletcher School in the School of Engineering at Tufts University. She is the founding director of the Tufts Master's Program in Cybersecurity and Public Policy. Susan is an author of many books. Her new book, People Count Contact Tracing Apps in Public Health, published by MIT Press, focuses on the efficacy, equity, and privacy. She's also written exclusively on books on, extensively, not exclusively, books on encryption and wiretap policy. She's received a number of awards. She's been a distinguished engineer at Sun Microsystems. She received the 2008 Women of Vision Social Impact Award. She's been a Guggenheim Fellow, and she was inducted in 2015 into the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame and into the Information Systems Security Association Hall of Fame in 2018. So thank you, Susan, for being here. Serge Egelman is the research director of the Usable Security and Privacy Group at ICSI, the International Computer Science Institute, and he is also holds an appointment in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley. His research focuses at the intersection of privacy, computer security, and human-computer interaction, with the specific aim of better understanding how people make decisions surrounding their privacy and security. He has worked extensively in this space, and his work has received multiple Best Papers awards, including 7 ACM Chi honorable mentions, the 2012 SUPES Distinguished Paper Award, and the 2017 SUPES Impact Award, and the 2012 Information Systems Research Best Published Paper Award for his work on consumers' willingness to pay for online privacy. So, welcome. And finally, we have Carmela Troncoso, who is an associate professor, where she heads the Spring Lab at EPFL here in Switzerland. She's also our general chair, so thank you for all of the work that you've done there. Her work focuses on security and privacy. Her thesis work received the European Research Consortium for Informatics and Mathematics Security and Trust Management Best PhD Award. And she's also received her work in privacy engineering received the CNIL INRIA Privacy Protection Award. She's won the LATSI University Prize, the Best Teacher Awards at EPFL, and Distinguished Paper Awards at Usenix Security Symposium. And she's also co-chaired Usenix Security. So welcome. Okay, so hopefully you've all followed my instructions and asked questions. Okay, so the first question goes to Carmela, and the question reads, your work with the Red Cross on privacy-preserving humanitarian distribution looks interesting and impactful. Can you talk about how this collaboration with the International Red Cross was initiated? Did the Red Cross approach the university, or did it emerge in some other way?
So we're very lucky of being here at EPFL because in Geneva there is a big hub of humanitarian organizations, and in particular EPFL does have a very good relationship with the Red Cross. And when I arrived here to Lausanne, we were starting a program for teaching for humanitarian organizations to train them in computer science, and I got to teach my privacy courses for them, and then I met them, and with that we started talking about well, what kind of problems they have and what kind of solutions we could do. But if people are interested in actually meeting those that have problems, what I would recommend, and I think I do a lot, is to go a lot of events that are not like this. They are not full of geeks. They are actually full of people we normally don't talk to, and we need to get a little bit out of our comfort zone to go to their events and just talk to them about what they are doing, what they need, how do they feel when they work on the field, and that will actually get you contacts that you will never get at computer security conferences. Also, may I say, as a general chair, guys, if a door says don't open, okay? Thank you.
Okay. So this next question I'll pose to Susan, but really any of you are well qualified to answer this. But what do you think of the move of the EU to removing end-to-end? In 5 words or less.
It's crazy. That's 2 words. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. Carmela and I participated in a long paper on the problems with client-side scanning, which is, of course, one solution in big quotes, technical paper. Carmela and Bart Pernille organized a letter of technologists that talked about the problems and have published an op-ed, as did I. We tried to publish slightly different op-eds so that we have multiple voices. It doesn't make sense because there are no efficacious, so the argument that the EU is using at the moment is in order to protect children, they use the word CSAM, child sexual abuse material, but they really mean child sexual abuse and exploitation, 4 different crimes investigated in somewhat different ways. The tools that are being proposed, perceptual hashing and machine learning, are not efficacious. We know about academic ways to interfere with them and create false positives and false negatives. Academic ways always get better. That is, there will always be better attacks than the ones we have so far posited. And in the case of child sexual abuse and exploitation, there's a lot of motivation for the criminals to make better attacks. So there's the issue of efficacy, the issue of false positives, which means that lots of people will be accused of sharing child sexual abuse material or worse, and falsely accused. It's one of those crimes that once you're accused of, you never recover. You and your family never recover. So not efficacious. And then, oh, by the way, it gets rid of end-to-end encryption, even though that's just a sidelight in the discussion. It's crazy. That's more than 5 words.
Carmela or Serge?
It's crazy is a very good summary.
I don't have anything to add.
I never thought I could silence Serge.
Okay, I'll pose this next one to Serge. The question is, what is the right balance of outcomes, papers, prototypes, etc., when doing research for humanitarian organizations? What does the humanitarian organization expect from researchers?
I'm not really sure how to answer that because I haven't done a ton of work for humanitarian organizations.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, Carmela.
I can take that one. That's a very good question, right? And the truth is that they need a bit of everything, and they particularly do need us to go a step beyond the paper, right? Just writing the paper is not going to get them anywhere. And they do need prototypes, but I think that what they need the most is to be listened to, right? Coming from the ivory tower and just say, here is my solution that I wrote in my last paper, that typically does not apply. And when you start talking with them, and whether this is a humanitarian organization or any non-governmental organization, they do have particularly nuances to the problem that actually are very interested research problems, and you need to do the research, but also produce the code and wherever you can work on the integration, right? There is a little bit more of work that needs to be done because they won't have the capability to just take your paper with a lot of alphas and betas and definitions in formal whatevers. They actually need something they can use. I hope that more or less answers.
I guess one thing that I will say is, having done a lot of work recently on that impacts public policy, that people out, non-researchers don't read research publications, and so you can do the research that might have potential impact outside of the research community, but unless you're actually doing the additional work to disseminate it, it's not going to really have that impact. So it doesn't end by publishing the paper and giving the conference talk. But instead, talking to people in other communities and doing, outreach that way, whether it be, op-eds and other, popular media, talking to journalists. So, I, rarely turn down, journalists who want to, speak about research because that's a way of disseminating it to other communities.
Do you have any advice for junior scholars in terms of how to talk to media or how to approach that, something that might necessarily be trained in graduate school, but maybe ought to be?
I mean, my main advice is, focus on reputable outlets. So there are a lot of, disreputable outlets that often have agendas, or even worse, are just incompetent and, won't read the paper. They see some, headline elsewhere and want to talk to you and basically want you to explain what they should write. And then often get details wrong, which is incredibly frustrating. But reputable outlets actually do the work to make sure that they have the story right and are accurately quoting you.
And spend a bit of time ahead of an interview thinking about a crisp way to describe what you've done, crisp and short and accurate way, because as Serge says, otherwise it'll get mangled.
Okay, this next question is for Serge. What do security researchers frequently get wrong about the security and privacy perceptions of ordinary users?
Oh, I think that one problem, one major problem in the security community is that, everything needs to be 100% secure, and we preoccupy ourselves with thinking of these very exotic, threat models, which the average user is not going to encounter. Meanwhile, the average user, should be using things like password managers and, multi-factor authentication, but because few people are focusing on the usability and the reasons why people struggle with using these technologies, which would be, very helpful for everyone's security, it just sort of falls by the wayside. So I think, I guess it's, not seeing the forest for the trees.
This next question I'll ask to Susan. Should the U.S. have a federal privacy law? And if so, what is the path of getting there? What would it cover?
Yes, the U.S.
In 10 words.
Yes, yes, yes. I have 7 more left. Yes, the U.S. should have a general privacy law. We've suffered in the U.S. for the last 50 years with a sectoral privacy law. The Federal Privacy Act that passed in the 1970s only constrains the federal government, and not very much. There has been a law that's had support on both sides of Congress and looked like it might have moved forward last session. It didn't. It needs to be extended in various ways, including covering things like metadata and telemetry, which is my own favorite issue at the moment. But it is not a bad first step. The problem is we'd actually have to get Congress to start passing legislation instead of holding hearings, attacking each other. And right now, we have a completely dysfunctional legislature of which privacy is simply one victim.
I think it's worse than that, though. The situation is worse than that. Because in the U.S., there's a patchwork of sectoral laws like HIPAA covering health data. You have Gramm-Leach-Bliley covering financial data. But violations are everywhere. And so the laws are pretty useless unless there's robust enforcement. And under most of the laws, there are specific agencies that can do the enforcement, and they're under-resourced and often don't have, the expertise or just the bandwidth to bring, the enforcement actions that are necessary. And so without adequate enforcement, it's silly having the law.
And I would add to Serge's point that the Federal Trade Commission, which is the main agency for doing it, only has limited legislative authority to do such actions. So it would need to be bolstered not only in budget, but also in extent.
Okay, another question from Zulip. This I'll pose to Carmela. The technical computer security and privacy community seems to get involved with policy discussions like the E2E1 or the recent EU move to mandate certificate authority trust somewhat haphazardly or late, once nonsense ideas have taken root and gained political momentum. What would be a better pipeline for contributing our expertise to policymakers look like?
So I think that, again, the answer is a little bit the same as in the first one, which is also what Serge says, right? We focused a lot on our business model, and our business model is we have students publish papers get published in good places, we write the grant, we get more money, get more students, and we move in that cycle. But as he said, this is not the place where policymakers read about our work. So to actually have this influence and not get late, you need to learn about those things early. And to learn about those things early, we need to go somewhere else. So going to policy conferences, getting involved in some of those things, and also many times trying to get the language that they speak, which is not our language. I think that could go a long way, but now I also understand that it's very hard because it doesn't go in our business model, right? It takes a lot of time to actually get back something good for the academic career, because you need to do this for a while to actually kind of get a name and then get a call for more things, become expert in this stuff. But really, as a community, if we don't do that, then we essentially are not going to do our job for society, because we will not influence and we will not make our voices heard.
So this is a kind of issue that the physicists learned after the explosion of the first atomic bomb. The biologists began thinking about it in the 1970s as genome editing happened. As Carmela says, you need to really learn the language and thinking of the other field. That's very expensive for a graduate student to do. I work now, I started off as a theoretician, as a theoretical computer scientist, but for the last 25 years I've been working in versions of cybersecurity policy, mostly encryption, wiretap, and surveillance issues, but periodically privacy issues. But I got to do that later in my career. It is not, under the US model, a really appropriate, easy thing for somebody to get tenure doing that interdisciplinary thing. I know of only one faculty member in the US who's been hired in the joint appointment. And so learning about those things and sitting in on classes and talking to people and maybe writing an occasional paper with people in the other side is a reasonable thing very early in your career. Post-tenure, it becomes a different thing. But as Carmela says, it's absolutely essential to understand their vocabulary and their thinking. One of the ways I think about it is we all think in zeros and ones. Either something is true or it's false. They don't. Everything is gray. And understanding that different kind of thinking, which happens at multiple levels, is absolutely essential for having impact.
This next question is for Carmela. Most of the major PET categories, including things like secure multi-party computation, zero-knowledge proofs, differential privacy, private information retrieval, etc., were identified over a decade ago. While research and refinement continue, will there be any wholly new categories of PETs in the future?
You should tell my students if that is true, so that they can start working on that. I don't know. To me, a little bit, all of these things, they are new category, they are new technology, right? All of these at the end is, I don't know how it's called nowadays, confidential computing. I don't know, it's the new buzzword for all of that. So I don't know if there are going to be new categories, but I think that there need to be new ways of thinking and new ways of maybe using those technologies, right? We need to think a little bit more about, maybe less about what's the next paper that I'm going to write on this topic, but what is the next problem I have to solve, and that is how the new technologies will appear, because we think about problems, and we're going back again to the same theme, which is to learn the problems, you need to talk to the people to have them. right, with these end users, humanitarian, policymakers, and that is what I think will bring new categories, because we will find out new threat models in which we're gonna need to produce new technology to actually address them.
Thank you. This next question is addressed to all of you, so I'll let anyone who wants to chime in. Is there any chance that major tech companies will adopt stronger privacy-enhancing technologies in the face of the accuracy losses they imply and the associated revenue penalties, particularly in advertising?
You go Europe and pass those laws. The Netherlands had required that for software telemetry, the tech companies selling programs to the Netherlands Department of Education for use by students change how they were collecting the data and change notice and choice to make it real and so on. And they pointed out to the companies, which were Microsoft and Google, that doing so would enable them to sell to other European countries because it would satisfy GDPR. And Microsoft and Google did that for software being sold for educational purposes within the Netherlands. Meta has not done that. But I think that you have clout to do that and should be exercising that. I don't know that there's appetite in the US yet to do that, but Europe is a big market. If Asia were to go along, that would be another big market. But it's going to take market pressure, and it also, as Serge pointed out earlier, enforcement is complicated. And unless fines increase and other things increase, it's not going to have impact.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, businesses are beholden to shareholders, and they're going to do whatever's most profitable. And so, either there's, pressure from, on the legal compliance front, or, losing customers due to, objectionable practices. The problem is, right now, we don't really have, a free market because of massive information asymmetries. Most, consumers don't really understand, what sorts of data is being collected from them, but often, object to it when it's brought to their attention. And I think, that's why this is all, fundamentally a policy problem, because, those information asymmetries aren't going to be, cleared up on their own through market mechanisms. That's where policy comes in.
I think the answer is clearly no. Like, there is absolutely no reason why they would do that, because there is a market for the opposite. I also think that we need to rethink what we mean about strong privacy mechanisms to be applied. Does that mean to just do all the training in a privacy-preserving way and having exactly the same status quo in which the asymmetry of power is the same? Have we then have a really privacy-preserving technology? In my opinion, personal, is that not that much? And until we kind of get a little bit this difference between technologies that just enable the exactly same business model that we object to in a privacy-preserving way, if that is maybe the privacy-preserving that we're looking for, then maybe, yes, there is hope that they will, because they will maintain their business model. If what we object to is to all of this asymmetry of power and asymmetry of information, then maybe we need to move somewhere else, and now I don't think there is any chance. And I also don't think that it's only a question of information asymmetry, it's a question of infrastructure asymmetry. As long as we have to build all of applications on the platforms controlled by big tech, it's extremely hard that there's going to be more privacy technologies in there, because if they don't implement them in the platform, we cannot implement them on top.
Okay, this next question I'll pose to Serge. We as a community spend a lot of time coming up with cool pets, privacy-enhancing technologies, before the utility of our existing ones have been proven or have had substantial impact. How do we incentivize closer alignment of our work with real-world impacts, and should this be something venues such as PETS should be hosting?
Yes, I think this is a big problem in privacy and security. I sort of touched on this before, that we're preoccupied with very exotic threat models that most people aren't really going to encounter. And instead, miss, either, incremental stuff that can have profound impact, or just studying ways of having, impact, with, known technologies. I don't know how to incentivize this. I mean, it's a frustration when submitting to the big security conferences that the paper needs to be novel or have an unexpected result or it gets rejected. I don't really know how you fix that other than maybe having chairs be more cognizant of it and nudge reviewers to focus on impact as opposed to novelty or unexpected results.
Carmela?
I think that the problem here is not the conferences are sometimes hard, but conferences are actually getting there and getting to have impact on things that have more problems, right? Our work in humanitarian organizations has actually been very well recognized and received Best Paper awards. Here in the first row we have Collins that has done work extremely cool on very unhinged communities that also get awards, or Michelle working with sex workers, and all of those things starting to be recognized, and they have value in the academia. But I think that the real incentive is not going to come from more papers being published. The real incentive comes from the fact that our only business model, again, is this publishing of papers, right? As long as your university, when they're going to give you tenure, don't count for these other things, they don't allow us, or they don't allow people in general to spend some time maybe doing something that is not going to be published in a company, but actually is going to have impact. If that does not count for your tenure case, then there is no way, right, that we can do it, because that is not how our career works. So I think that this is important, and conference and reviewers are more open to maybe not novel things, but it's even more important that we put pressure on our institutions to show that work that has impact and work that goes on conference is not the same, and both of them need to be equally valued. Otherwise, we just don't have a space to do some other of the things that matter.
And I would say, from my experience being much older than both of you, that I have seen a difference even in the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, PETS or IEEE Security and Privacy or any of those conferences had no papers with a sociologist on it, had no papers with an economist on it, and so on. And there is this, no papers that had a policy tilt. There is this shift happening. It's not happening nearly as quickly as I think it should, and clearly that Serge and Carmela think it should, but it is happening a little. What you have to do is also change the university infrastructure so that the associate and full professors and the deans get it. And get that security papers and privacy papers that are really nice mathematically, but don't have a chance of going anywhere, are fine if all you're judging is on mathematics. But if you want to actually judge for being useful, then you have to also look at other criteria. So you have to change both the infrastructure of the universities, but I am seeing it change in funding in the United States and in the way we've been running conferences. Again, not as rapidly as I'd like, but I am seeing that change some.
Thank you. Our next question is extremely highly upvoted. So as a reminder, you can upvote questions, and I encourage you to do so. This question pertains to ethics. So the questioner asks, or states, this question is about the ethics aspects of security and privacy research. A lot of ethical questions in our field seem to focus on how to do this specific project ethically. But sometimes the question I ask myself is more like, should we actually do this kind of research? Should I go down this path? Do any of you encounter such questionings during your career? What was your answer and why?
So,
why don't you each answer that? Because I'm sure the answer is probably yes in all cases.
So the person who has one of the people who's greatly influenced me in my career, someone named Joe Rutblot. He was at Los Alamos. He was a Pole who had come to England. I'm going to take a little bit of time on this one, but I think his story is very much worth telling. He's a Pole who came to England in 1938, went back to Poland in 1939 to try and get his wife to join him in England. She was unable to and died in the Holocaust. He asked his thesis advisor when he was back in Poland that a back-of-the-envelope calculation had shown him a nuclear weapon was possible. Should he work on it? He was working with Chadwick, the discoverer of the neutron. His advisor, Rutblot's advisor, told him that that was his decision to make. He went back to England and decided he would work on the atomic bomb project that the Brits were doing because it was really important that the Allies get to the bomb before the Nazis did. He eventually was brought to Los Alamos when the British project joined. He was very close with Chadwick, so he was with Chadwick when General Groves would visit. General Groves ran the Los Alamos project. I'm doing this all very briefly, so I apologize if I'm skipping things that you guys don't know. when D-Day happened, the US Army had right behind the tanks a group of physicists. Their job was to find Heisinger, who, if the Germans had built a nuclear weapon, Heisinger would be involved. When the physicists found Heisinger, they found that the Germans had only gotten to the point of building a nuclear reactor, not a weapon. And that news came back to Los Alamos in the fall of 1944. At that point, Rotblat left the project and went back across the United States and to England. He was the only person to leave the project or to raise objections to building the nuclear weapon before the first test in New Mexico in July of 1945. By the time the physicists realized what was about to happen and said, no, we shouldn't launch this weapon, we should do a test in somewhere in the Pacific where the Japanese can see, et cetera, it was too late. They lost control of the project. That, I learned of Rotblat's story a long, long time ago, and it has had an impact on me my entire career. And yes, I did have a position where I felt that I was not doing things that would enable me to look myself in the mirror in the mornings. And I left Google after 7 months. It wasn't that I found Google doing anything unethical. I did not find them doing unethical things, or at least illegal things, but I found they didn't satisfy my level of ethics. And it's the first time I've ever phrased that quite that publicly. So I hope I haven't upset any of my former colleagues who may be sitting in the audience. But they know why I left.
I guess one frustration that I've had recently is doing, work on, with human subjects. There's been, I guess, sort of a realization that, in the U.S., studies with human subjects need IRB approval. And for a lot of people who aren't really familiar with the system, on program committees, whenever they see, humans involved in a study, there's this question of, did you get IRB approval? Not really understanding what the process is. And so IRB approval is not the same thing as an ethics review. They're orthogonal. So in the US, studies where humans are the subject of the experiment need to go through the IRB approval. But that doesn't mean that if humans are involved in research that they necessarily meet the definition of human subjects research. And so those studies aren't reviewable by an IRB. So for instance, things like getting humans to perform tasks on crowdsourcing sites, just to automate labor, like tagging images or stuff like that, where you're not studying the human behavior, that's not something an IRB will review. And I've noticed that at a lot of conferences recently, people, will bring this up in the reviews that, why didn't you get IRB approval for this, not really understanding what the process entails. And I think, fundamentally the issue is it's up to the researcher to decide whether something's ethical. That's not something that you outsource to, various, internal organizations that are there for, legal compliance reasons. And so, the IRB is not a substitute for deciding whether or not a study is ethical or not. It might involve human subjects and be perfectly ethical. It might not, might not involve human subjects and be unethical. And so, I think part of it is understanding why something might be, unethical or not just, did it receive IRB approval.
So I want to get to Carmela in 1 second, but I just wanted to ask a quick follow-up question to that. So something that you said was really interesting, and I agree as kind of PC chair, there needs to be a lot more education as to what an IRB is and isn't. You said that you thought it was up to the researcher to determine what is and is not ethical. Where does the role of a PC, for example, play?
Oh, I think absolutely the PC should be doing that, but that's after the research has been conducted, right? By the time the PC reviews it, that the research has been conducted and has been written up and submitted to the conference. And so for that reason, the first ethical check should be the researcher, and that's not something you outsource to another organization.
I should just mention that other fields have ethics boards and things where you can go to first before the research. And TOR, for example, runs the TOR Research Safety Board, which is kind of one such effort. But it would be great to have more of those types of things in our community. Carmela?
I heard Michelle is going to solve that problem. So I do have very, very strong ethical fights with myself on what research to do and what research not to do, and what systems to build and what systems not to build, because we have a lot of capabilities with our privacy technologies to build things maybe in a better way. So when we did the contact tracing apps and we went all in and we built them, we decided that was worth it, because the alternative was a very horrible world in which a lot of data would be collected by central servers that would actually check all of the connections and movements of everyone. But then when the COVID passports came, and actually were also kind of privacy invasive, right? I mean, because of the contact tracing apps, they were decentralized, which was already a big win, but still they collect a lot of things. And maybe most of you thought about, why are we doing this with anonymous credentials? Which of course we could, right? And at that point we decided to not do it and not enter that battle, because we didn't want to create a technology that could actually do all of these checks at borders, at entrances, and could create a lot of discrimination, and put a privacy label on it that would actually make it acceptable for people, especially after a lot of effort we have done in the contact tracing apps. Our group had a lot of influence, right, and our kind of approval could be understood as this technology is okay, and we didn't want to create that. And I have these many ways, many times, because we can create better versions of products, but the question is this product something that I want to exist? And I also find it's very hard to make the decision not only on, do I want to be a part of somebody that put this in the world or not, but also when I choose projects with my students, is this something that, yeah, we can make a paper, we can write a paper, we're going to have impact, top S&P, very good for their career, versus we're going to create something that maybe I would prefer, as Susan said, is not something that I feel comfortable putting in the world. And it is very hard, I think, to do those things, and with search, right? You need to think about what do you want, and what I think about is what is the world in which I want my son to live, and I only build things in which I think I would like him to live.
I actually have a couple examples. My student Nikita is going to be presenting a paper tomorrow. We came up with this idea about 2 years ago and started the project looking at the accuracy of right-to-know requests. And it was around this time that we had, planned, started the study that this group at Princeton did a very similar thing, and there was a big ethical backlash. We paused. We hadn't yet started the study, but we basically paused what we were doing and thought about it for about a year to figure out, are we doing this ethically? And, ultimately, it came down to thinking about, why were people upset about the other study? And, the reason was they were sending emails to organizations that didn't necessarily need to be compliant with GDPR or CCPA, and asking open-ended legal questions that were running up lawyer time, which costs organizations money. And that's why people were upset. And so, we wanted to focus on just organizations that had public information about how to submit requests. Therefore, telling the they were telling the public that they will be receptive to those requests, and sending requests in the format that they prescribed. And so, based on that reasoning, we decided that, to proceed, because we would be, unlikely to have the same, backlash over that.
Okay, thank you. Our next question goes to you, Serge. Up to what point do you think anti-censorship applications are really useful? I, meaning the questioner, have the impression that the more useful anti-censorship applications get, the bigger the incentive of censors to block them anyway.
Maybe. I actually don't really have strong opinions on this. I mean, I haven't done a ton of work on anti-censorship stuff. Yeah, probably.
Anyone else want to chime in? Okay, it's my area of research, so I'll go with they're very useful and we should continue developing them.
I mean, I think that
it matters to the people under censorship. It matters a lot. It's a continuous process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that the best, the best solution to this is, making sure that, the various anti-censorship technologies aren't just, niche things being used by, people, in, oppressive regimes, but instead if they're, if there's more collateral damage from blocking those things, then they're less likely to get blocked. So if everything, for instance, is running through, say, AWS, few governments are going to block all of AWS, right?
Yeah, those governments are the ones that are going to block the US, right?
Sure, but I guess the point is that, the more general, the more the general public uses the technologies, I think the less, and the more potential for collateral damage. That's the best solution that I can come up with. But certainly there are others who have studied this a lot more than I have.
This next question is for Susan. Does weak salience of privacy and lack of meaningful data protection enforcement spell the end for the Brussels effort in tech, in which Europe's economic power pushes the global state of the art towards its values? As we approach the next global regulatory challenge/opportunity with AI, is there any chance that strong regulation wins the war of ideas, or does laissez-faire win out?
I feel like I'm supposed to boil the ocean. We're in a world in which Russia invaded Ukraine 18 months ago. Trump unexpectedly won an election in 2016 and possibly can win again in 2024. The havoc happening with climate change is really evident in the last few months. So we're in a world of a lot of turmoil, and often in a world of a lot of turmoil, people turn to authoritarian regimes. So that's the context in which that question has to be answered. Outside that context, I think the European effort, which was not just at regulation, but it was also an economic fight that the Europeans are doing. It was never explicitly stated, but it's clear when you dig just a little, I think would have a lot of impact. In the context of this world, it's hard to know. We're in a state of incredible flux, and I don't feel any more competent to, anybody who thinks they can predict where the world is going to be in 5 years has not been reading the newspaper lately, is all I can say.
Thank you. I'll pose this next one to Carmela. All of you spoke a bit about how we as the community should engage with policymakers. How about the reverse? What kind of things would you like to see policymakers do to better interact with the pets or more broadly the academic community?
They should send staffers to pets and other conferences.
I think indeed it's the reciprocates, right? There is a lot of language, that there's a big language barrier anytime you enter into this kind of interdisciplinary conversation, and it's important that they also realize and they go into this. There may need to be some training. I have been in many policy meetings in which people just give up, like in the second slide, because it's going to be too difficult, right? And this gets training. The same thing that for me, sitting on a talk from policy or in law, it gets very hard. After the second slide, I want to sleep and never come back anymore, right? Like, have you seen a lawyer talk? It's like, so it's a bit like that, and then also the same thing, come into the events, get comfortable with the other side, and if, of course, like a lawyer needs not to enter in this thing, it's also accepting the fact that they need more technical staff in their teams that help them bridge this gap, because the gap cannot be bridged automatically, because we have a limited amount of time, both us and them, so yeah.
So I would add an orthogonal comment to what Carmela said. I've been running the last few years a master's degree in cybersecurity and public policy at Tufts, and it's joint between our School of International Affairs and our School of Engineering. It's pretty challenging to teach graduate level courses to students who've had exactly one course, graduate level computer science courses to students who've had one course in programming. But putting all that aside, one of the things that I have the students do in the policy courses is write several page briefs about various issues. They're writing about technical issues, but they're writing for policymakers. This is a really complicated exercise to do because they have to be correct and they have to be to the point. But our learning how to do that, learning how to precisely and briefly get at the issues that the policymakers care about, but saying things correctly technically. Go and look at Carmela and Bart's op-ed on CSAM as an example of how to do that sort of thing. That's part of what we need to do. Bringing the policymakers here, it might be great to have a keynote by a policymaker. They'll probably stick around for about an hour afterwards at most, so they won't learn a lot, except maybe we will meet them and get a chance to talk to them in their offices. But it takes concerted work on our side, I think. And remember, we're operating in the privacy sphere against the interests of the tech companies, largely.
Our next question is a follow-up to the earlier conversation in terms that regarding multidisciplinary work and the rewards of that, or the lack of rewards for that in the academic system. The question is, following up on the impact question, is this something we can address as a community in tenure letters? Does it make sense for senior folks in privacy to think about good language to communicate this to universities?
Absolutely. I think that is very important. Another thing that I think is very important, another that goes also in line with what Serge was pointing about conferences, right? One of the things that we also have, like there is this impact and how to do the impact, and that your letter writers may write about the impact you have beyond papers instead of just talking about your paper number 3. But also there is the impact on the community and on how we do things. Reviewing and program chairing are things that are not much valued in all of these tenure committees, and something that sometimes when you start as an assistant professor, they will tell you, don't do much reviewing, nobody cares, okay? But we have now 300 people, you have like 500 submissions, somebody needs to review them. And to have good reviewing, people that put the time, do all of the ethics, we need to value that. And this is something I do believe that as a community, indeed, because we are the ones that evaluate people, and we are the ones that write the letters to people. So we do have it in our hands to put the pressure to maybe, and indeed, maybe that would be a great idea to actually kind of get a clique of people that start doing this for each other and create a precedent that this is something we value, because otherwise it is very hard as an assistant professor. I understand even more in the US than in Europe.
This next question is for Serge. What are your thoughts on the use of privacy-enhancing technologies for targeted advertisements? For example, IPA from Meta and Mozilla, and Google's private attribution API.
I mean, I think that most consumers, when they understand what's happening, reject tailored advertising. At the same time, I think that there's sort of a mass delusion among the industry that this is hugely profitable. I mean, certainly it is for certain entities in the middle, right? But at the end of the day, I mean, so there was a study Alessandro Acquisti did a couple years ago where they were looking at bid amounts on websites. So you can get, from the clickstream data, when the ads are shown from the RTB auctions, you can see how much the advertiser is paying per click per ad shown on a website. And they did a controlled experiment where they cleared the cookies so that there would be no profile associated with certain users. And they found a difference of about 4% in revenues. But that also doesn't really consider the amount of the liability for storing the personal information, the infrastructure costs to do all of that. And so it seems like a lot of folks who are really committed to doing the targeted advertising without really having a rational understanding of what they're actually getting and what that's costing. And most consumers reject it. So I think that as privacy enforcement might ramp up over time, I suspect maybe there'll be some turning away from that, or maybe doing it in a more privacy preserving manner. But it doesn't seem like it's very effective. So I don't know in a couple of years whether we're still going to be spending the same amounts on targeted ads versus contextual ads, but it seems like it's money not well spent.
I think it's a very big problem, because I think this is a bit of a smoke screen, right? To maintain something as Serge says. What people object is not, they object to the data being taken, but they object to the advertising. The problem that we had when Cambridge Analytica took all of this data of Facebook was not that they took the data, was that they trained models to then influence people with targeted advertising. If Cambridge Analytica would have done all of these using I don't remember what Meta did, multi-party computation, differential private, whatever you presented before, and would be so privacy preserving, we would still have Donald Trump in the government and all of the events that happened later on. So it is a bit weird, and I think in terms of regulation and policymakers, I not only hope that there is more kind of privacy regulation, but also more regulation on what is it that are the kind of applications we want to have, and where we want to allow all of this influence in the world. So yeah, I think that there's a bit of distracting from the actual problems that policy should be trying to solve by saying we don't have any personal data.
Okay, this next question reads, assuming that changing the business model of universities, that being publish or perish, is harder than changing the operation of conferences like PETS, to make doing research that is focused on impact more attractive, couldn't or shouldn't conferences such as PETS open a track or something similar specifically targeted at these types of works, such that one can publish but still be allowed to do more impact-focused work? And I just want to, as a quick plug, we have a town hall later today to talk about pets and the future of pets in the conference. And this would be, an interesting thing to bring up there. And if you want to chime in.
I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, it looks great, right? We kind of open a new thing and then we can publish there. We just don't work on the hard problem, which should be to actually change the thing that is not working. And we just create even more work for the community because we need more reviewers that are going to do that. And then eventually we need some kind of bar for when does this thing work or doesn't work. So on the one hand, it looks very nice. And I think also, as Susan said before, it's actually happening very slowly. These things get published at good places. But I think that giving up on it's too hard to change universities and the policies, which we're just going to create more work on us, is going to be worse for the community down the line than actually maybe trying to change the hard problem.
I will say a structural thing here, which is about 15 years ago, I started the Athena Lectureship, which is something that ACM does, an award for senior women that all of the special interest groups nominate a senior woman and then one gets picked, et cetera, et cetera. And I noticed the last year that I was chairing the Athena committee, all the letters that came in quoted H factors and other things that I could read off the resumes. I had exactly one letter that talked about the quality of the paper. I see the same thing in tenure decisions in my own department, that the letters that come in and the discussion that often happens is about impact numbers rather than actual, what does the paper say? Is it interesting? What kind of work is the person doing? Is it interesting? What are they doing? I think we've all become so overworked. We're spending time on factors that are easy to pull out of a Vita or a Google search and not spending time on actually thinking. And that requires us all to pull back. It's easier for the senior people to do that and say, no, this is what's important. The junior people don't usually have the same freedom. But I think there's been a shift in a way that makes the kind of changes we're talking about very hard to do.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'll aim this towards you, Susan. What is your personal framework or thought process to reason about the double-sidedness that privacy-enhancing technologies can have? How do you reflect upon potential benefits to humanity versus potential detriments?
Should do it?
Sure.
Oh, wait, did you say it was?
Yes.
Oh. Yeah. So that's a hard one in the sense that when I see it employed somewhere like Apple that doesn't have a business model, a particular business model on collecting personal data, I say, great. And when I see it in the way that Serge just described a little while ago, or that Carmela talked about with, we really care about them collecting the data and not the manipulative tools that they're using, what form of manipulative tools they're using. I think the privacy-enhancing technologies, the technologies themselves are, some of them are great, some of them are academic exercises. I think the change has to come from somewhere else, and it's on the policy side rather than on the thinking about the tools themselves.
How I think about it is that, in general, when we think about the bad effects, and I guess that the person asking the question refers to the fact that, well, if we have Tor, then terrorists are going to use it, and the pedophiles are going to use it, and all of those things. But the real truth is that the bad people have a lot of time to create their own infrastructures, while the people then don't have that. The average people then have no tools to create anything. And when we, in order to protect from the bad things, we unprotect the people that should be protected, we overall are in a bad place. So I think it's very important to not forget that. And yes, we will have bad people in the world, but if we don't protect the good people, then we just have lost.
Okay, so thank you all very much for your questions, and let me thank Carmela, Serge, and Susan for their willingness to do this.